Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to talk about something that's absolutely critical in any precast project, the project sample. We're going to dig into the requirements from the PCI Quality Control Manual, TM-101, Section 1.5, and really show you how to nail this right from the very beginning. Okay, so here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll get into why samples are such a big deal. Then we'll define what a real benchmark sample actually is, cover why identifying them is a must, and walk through the approval process. After that, we'll see how they become your go-to standard for quality, and we'll wrap it all up with the one key takeaway you need to remember. So let's think about this for a second. In any big project, what's the single biggest risk? It's that gap, right? The gap between what the client pictures in their head and what actually gets delivered. That's the problem we have to solve before a single production panel ever gets poured. And the answer? It's the project sample. You got to think of this thing as more than just a chunk of concrete. It's a physical contract. It becomes the benchmark, the one single source of truth for quality and appearance that everyone on the project agrees to. So let's start with the big why. When you use them right, project samples are your best defense against really expensive arguments, change orders, and rework. Their whole job is to get everyone, the precaster, the architect, the owner, looking at the same thing and nodding their heads in agreement from day one. And listen, this isn't just a friendly tip. The quality manual is crystal clear here. Getting that approval in writing is a mandatory step. It makes the agreement official, and it protects you, the producer, just as much as it protects the client. Okay, so we get why they're important, but let's get down to brass tacks. What exactly is a project sample, according to the manual? Now, the key phrase you really need to lock onto here is similar production techniques. What that means is the sample has to be an honest-to-goodness representation of the final product. You can't just make a perfect little one-off piece in a lab. It has to reflect what's actually going to come off the production line, warts and all. So these samples can actually come in a few different forms. Sometimes they're full-size units, which is fantastic when you can do it. Other times they might be just a piece of a larger unit, or maybe smaller, dedicated mock-ups. But here's the deal. Whatever size it is, it has to accurately show the final geometry and details. And this is a big one, it's held to the exact same dimensional tolerances as the final products, no exceptions. Look, you can have the most beautiful, perfect sample in the world, but it's totally useless if you don't know which project it's for, or maybe even more importantly, how you made it. That's why getting the identification right isn't just a good idea, it's completely non-negotiable. To make sure there's zero confusion, every single sample needs three things. First, a clear ID mark, project name, date, all that good stuff. Second, that ID has to be specifically called out in the official approval papers. And third, you need detailed production notes, the mix, the materials, the techniques, so you can actually make it again, consistently. All right, let's shift gears and talk about how this all plays out in the real world. This is where those larger samples, the mock-ups, get put in front of the architects and engineers to get that final official sign-off. Now, a mock-up that's used for visual approval has to meet some pretty specific demands. It's got to be big enough to actually show the real variations in color and texture that you'd expect to see. It needs to be the same thickness as the final product and show details like reveals at their actual size. And this is crucial. It needs to represent the full range of the expected finish, not just the absolute perfect version. Oh, and it has to be made from a full-size production batch to be a true representation. Now, this is one of my favorite little details in the standard, a 20-foot viewing distance. Why? Well, it's actually pretty smart. It forces everybody to look at the finish from a realistic perspective, the way it's going to be seen on the actual building. You're not supposed to be judging it with a magnifying glass, where tiny acceptable variations can look like huge problems. So here's the path to getting it done, and it is a strict sequence. You create the mock-up, the design team reviews it, you get that formal written approval, and only after you have that piece of paper in hand can mass production begin. You can't skip a step. But listen, once you get that sign-off, the sample's job is not over, not by a long shot. In fact, it immediately gets a promotion. It goes from being an approval tool to being the #1 benchmark for your daily QC inspections. So if you're a QC tech, this right here is your bread and butter. The job is really straightforward. You hold up the production unit and compare it directly against that approved sample. That side-by-side check is, without a doubt, the best way to make sure every single panel leaving that plant is consistent. And it's so important to remember this. The goal is not for every piece to be a perfect identical twin of the sample. The real goal is for every single piece to fall somewhere inside a pre-approved range of variation.
That range, for color, for texture, even for how repairs should look, has to be established and agreed upon before you start pumping out panels.
Okay, let's pull all this together. If you only remember one thing from this whole explainer, please make it this next point. The big takeaway is this. This process is not a one-way street. It isn't about the customer making demands. It is all about mutual protection. The sample creates a clear, physical, agreed-upon set of expectations that protects everybody involved. And that really is the bottom line. When you lock in this agreement up front, you stop misunderstandings before they can start, you avoid incredibly expensive rework, and you just set the stage for a much smoother, more successful, and honestly a more profitable project for everyone.
So as you head back out to the plant, start thinking about this. The next project sample you see, what's the first thing you're going to check? Is it going to be the ID tag in the paperwork? Are you going to look for the documented range of finish? Or are you going to check how it's actually being used for those daily QC comparisons? Because mastering this process, that's the key to mastering quality.